I've always quite liked grey nights. They have the aesthetic of Space Marines with more angles, a little bit more knightly, and also the added benefit of being part of the Inquisition and having that additional secrecy. So I decided that I was going to pick up a box of grey nights and actually paint a combat patrol of them. But the issue I have is that grey nights are typically silver, and it can be relatively annoying to try and get nice looking silver using multiple different washes. We always lose a bit of that shine. So what I thought I would do is go out and pick up some more liquid metals, which I've used in other videos, but this time I've got some blues and some silvers, which I think we could use in this project in order to get some really nice, shiny and aesthetically pleasing grey nights ready for the tabletop in hopefully not too much time. So let's jump in, see how long it takes me to get a combat patrol of grey nights all up and running, ready for the tabletop to a nice standard. We're going to be starting off from a black undercoat, and the reason for this is going from black and applying silver over the top, we should hopefully get a nice maximum amount of shine from those layers. The first layer is going to be this steel grey colour, which is a nice dark silver, and we can simply thin it down and slap it all over the model, catching anything that we want to be metallic. Once this is dry, it can be followed up with a dry brush of a lighter silver. This one just being called blue-grey. What we want to do is take this and dry brush it in a semi-heavy fashion, catching all of the edges and raised panels before letting it dry fully and moving on. These paints aren't really sold for miniature painting purposes, so they're a little bit thicker than I'm used to, and I have needed to thin them down more than usual. However, I have noticed that they do have a good consistency and a nice ability to cover even after they've been diluted a fair amount. So overall, I quite like them for metallics. And we're going to now be following up the next layers of metallics on the armour for the Grey Knights. And I want this to still read as silver armour on our Grey Knights, while also having a little bit of colour nuance within it. So to do that, I'm going to grab this pearl blue colour and a dry brush. This colour is not silver, but more of a pale desaturated blue metallic, and we're going to use this and our dry brush to repeat these last steps, but in a softer fashion, just in order to bring out all of the edges in a blue tint, as well as helping to map out our edges for some later steps. Once we've worked through all of the models, you can see from this before and after that we get a nice blue sheen across the models, while still remaining in that silver armour region that you would expect from Grey Knights. Then we can do some final edge highlighting, and we want to take the palest metallic blue that we've got. The one that I bought is called light blue, and when it goes down to the eye, it looks very close to silver, but with a very slight blue tint, which is perfect for the highlights that we'll be doing. We can use this to edge highlight every single edge across all of the models, and once this has been applied and it has dried, I'm calling it done with the silver aspects of the armour. One of the advantages that I found with these metallics is because, from my understanding, it's actually dyed metallic flecks in here. It's not metallic paint that has then been tinted with inks. We don't lose any of the shine that we might with adding inks into metallics, which is really, really nice for this application because it means that we have a true shine as long as we don't apply any washes or matte coats over the top. And it's shiny enough that we're actually picking up reflection lights from my red wall and things like that while painting. So it is a true shine across the model, which is nice. But we're not doing the armor anymore, and to do the other areas, I need to go back in and painstakingly pick out all of the black areas so that we're not working from a shiny base coat. Once the painstaking work of going round and painting all of the silver areas back to black, we can carry on, and for these Grey Knights we opted to have the typical red accents for the models, which means that we can bundle the next few steps together. Anything that is going to be either red or brown on the models will get a quick base coat of a reddish brown, which will work to build from all of our other stages for both of those colours. Let's look at the reds first, and here all of the items got a nice base layer of a dark red, leaving all of the browns in the recesses. We can then follow this up quickly with a crimson wash, which did a nice job of tying the past two steps together, giving us something to build out some highlights from. These models do have a lot of various elements that are going to be this red colour. So we've got the guns, we've got tabards, we've got purity seals. However, all of these elements are different fabrics or materials. So in order to represent this, what I'm going to do is actually highlight them in different ways. Such as the tabards and fabrics, what I'm going for is some streaky, scratchy highlights in a particular direction, vertical, horizontal, take your pick. We can go through and simulate that textury fabric feel. Whereas for the gun areas, we were doing solid panel lines which reflect and give us the feeling of light bouncing off of a solid red metal surface. Things like that will just help to add some variance with our models while making sure that they still look cohesive because we're using the same colours on all of those elements. Where was I? Oh yes, washes. So we've just applied the wash, and once that's dry, we can start working on the highlights. And to do this, we're going to grab a new colour, which is going to be a mid-red, and we can start to mix this in a 50-50 ratio with our original dark red base coat. We can then use this to highlight any of the upward facing panels of red, catching things like the weapon shafts as well as all of the billowy sections of robes, highlighting them in the style that I mentioned earlier. Then we can go in and do a second round of highlighting using just the mid-red without any mixing. This edge highlight will highlight all of the red areas that we've painted up, and once we've got that done, we can move on to the browns. For all of the brown areas, we can attack it in the same way we did the red. So for different fabrics and materials, we can highlight them in different ways. I started with the original brown that we've used throughout and then added in a 50-50 mix of some dark sand. Any sort of off-white color would work here, but what we want to do is make a mid-tone that we can use to go around and highlight all of the brown areas in different styles, as mentioned, similar to the reds. Taking this 50-50 mix, we can go and do our highlights, and we're going to do the first ones catching all of the raised areas. We're looking at getting everything that's going to be brown with this first round of highlights, from pouches to ropes to purity sealed papers. Once we have worked through the unit, the first one should be dry by the time we finish the last, and we can do our second highlight, which is just straight dark sand. This round of highlights will be focusing on the edges and the most raised areas before we take a light flesh tone and mix that into our sand colour in order to give us a colour slightly closer to white while still maintaining the same sandy colours, and we can do a final edge highlight with that tone. Now naturally there are a lot of smaller elements across all of the models that we're not going to focus on massively, mainly things like the blacks. All of the blacks got my very simple technique of, from a black base coat, we apply a very pale blue highlight, and then we apply a black wash to darken and bring it all down. That sorts all of the blacks out for tabletop standard, as long as it's not a main key feature. However, we do have some more interesting things that we can actually look at. So we've got the cloak for the librarian, which we're doing in blue. We also have things like all of the weapons for every single model. And then we've got a nice, neat, quick trick that you may want to stick around for on how we're going to deal with all of the gold across every single model. For the librarian's robes, we thought it'd be best to paint these as blue, marking respect for the member of the librarius that he is. Even though all Grey Knights are essentially psychers, it makes sense in my head for the librarians to be distinguished from the rest. First, we're going to need to lay down a dark blue base. Then we slowly add a brighter blue to the mix, trying to highlight the cape in a flowing manner to simulate something approximating leather. After a few rounds of highlighting and adding a lighter blue in each step, we end up with a hopeful nice transition from a dark blue up to the lighter blue that we've used in the mix. As the librarian's a character, I thought we'd take a little bit of extra step and care on his cloak and apply a optional final step, and that is the application of fluorescent blue. And fluorescent paints are something that you can buy and are quite interesting to use. However, here we're going to be adding it to the mix so that it's present and slowly building up some final highlights. We can take this fluorescent blue and start to add it to the brightest blue highlight we've done so far and do another quick highlight. The reason for this is so that the fluorescent blue is already present on the model before we go in doing our final step of just applying the fluorescent blue as it comes watered down out of the bottle. This prevents there being a stark contrast from where the fluorescent has dried versus where the normal paint has been before. Once the fluorescent has dried though, we can move on to some of the other elements, such as the various gold elements across all of the models. For the various elements that are gold across this model, I wanted to get different sort of textures, which you may have noticed as a theme on this combat patrol. However, the easiest way to do this for metallics would be to have one less shiny than the other. Rather than going around and painting all of the metallics and trying to find a way of doing that, I thought the easiest way would be just to tin all of the work we've done so far. Generally, by applying contrast over a metallic, the reason we haven't done that so far is that it mutes out and mats out our paint job. which, if we're going for an antique gold, is just what we want. So we can grab a yellow and a brown contrast, mix them together, and we can start on tinting our silvers into a lovely antique gold. Depending on the colours that we've chosen, we may need to vary the ratio slightly, but generally the browns in this case are going to be stronger than the yellows. So in this mix, we're going for 25% brown and 75% yellow. The advantage of using contrast here is that they naturally seep into the recesses to add that extra shading, which means that we can take this mix and just work around all of the various elements that we want to then be gold and apply a quick wash of this contrast over those elements, making sure to be careful so that we don't have to go around and correct any overspill of this contrast with normal metallics later on. With that done, we have the fun bit left, which is all of the weapons across every single model. And now the Grey Knights have Nemesis weapons worthy of killing demons, and in order to do this, I also have a lot of coloured metallics. So I'm going to use coloured metallics to make a funky, really nice blade that I think is worthy of decapitating a demon. In order to do this, we can grab a purple metallic or make a purple metallic and apply this across the entirety of the blade. This is going to be our center color, and we can follow it up once it's dry with an application of dark blue metallics. This we are going to be applying not only to the edges, but also as a scratchy highlight across all of the beveled sections of the blade. Once this is dry, we can essentially repeat the process, but in a much narrower fashion, using the light blue, which is the highest highlight color of our armor. Finally, this is entirely optional, but we're going to be coming in and tinting the very edges and most edge points of the blades by giving them a bright metallic green edge highlight. This hopefully gives them a nice ethereal color shifting blade that I think is well worthy of a demon hunting space marine. With the last edge highlight applied on the weapons, the models are done. This combat patrol is painted, and it took around 11 hours and 40 minutes to get it done, and I really like how the metallics came out, so I may be investing in a few more colours of that range. However, there's one thing you may have noticed. I haven't painted the Dread Knight, and the reason for that is that while it comes in the Combat Patrol box, it doesn't necessarily form part of a Combat Patrol. So I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing with that. I might paint it up in the exact same scheme, or I might use it for something a little bit special later on down the line. So if you've got any ideas, let me know down in the comments. But overall, besides that, the only thing I haven't told you how to do in this video is the face. So covering that off quickly, it was a base coat of a flesh tone highlighted with a lighter flesh tone, and then I gave it a wash. It's nothing special, which is why I didn't think I'd waste your time featuring it in the video. But otherwise, the only thing needed on this unit is essentially a base. So if you're interested in a base for your marmies, you might want to check out this playlist. Alternatively, if you want to see how I tackle similar projects to this, check out this playlist. Otherwise, remember to subscribe so that we can see you next time.